Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today in this video, I will be wrapping up all of the books that I read in the months of January and February 2019. I was just about to cough there in the middle of my sentence. So sorry that sounded so weird. Like I said, I read 5 books this month for a total of 2,453 pages. Yeah, some of the books that I read were chunkers. And my average rating from these 5 books was 4.375 stars, which is very specific, but I rated all of these books pretty high, so there were a couple half stars in there, which is why it's such a specific number. I also should just say that some of these books I don't have with me anymore, so I'm just gonna have to insert a picture of them when I'm editing this video, because one of them I read at the beginning of January before I came back to college, and you know, why bring a book back with me to college if I already finished it and it's just gonna take up a lot of room? And the other one, after I finished reading it, my mom came to visit me and I gave the book to her because I really liked it and I thought she'd really like it too. And she read it and she did like it, so that was great that I could share that with her. The very first book that I read in 2019 was Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. I really liked this book and I gave it 4 stars. This is a companion to his A Song of Ice and Fire series, where this is a history of House Targaryen from when Aegon the Conqueror landed in Westeros to the end of the Dance of Dragons Civil War. And this is going to be the first of 2 parts in this Targaryen history. It was very long. This is the longest book I read in these 2 months. It was over 700 pages. And I personally really did enjoy Fire and Blood. I know a lot of people were not happy that George was coming out with Fire and Blood because they've been waiting for The Winds of Winter, the next installment in the main A Song of Ice and Fire series, since I think 2011 is when the last book in the series came out, so they have been waiting for quite a while, and I understand that people want The Winds of Winter, but I also think it's really disappointing how ungrateful people were that he was giving us this new book. I saw people rating it 1 star on Goodreads, not because they read it and didn't like it, just solely because it wasn't The Winds of Winter, which I just find really rude. I feel like, yeah, we all want The Winds of Winter, but you should still be grateful that he's giving us this new material during the wait for The Winds of Winter, and like, I just think it's kind of rude to be so ungrateful when George is doing all this hard work to give us new content. I personally really like the Targaryens, so it was super interesting to me to learn all these new details about them. I think Queen Alysanne Targaryen, who is known as the Good Queen, is one of my favorite characters in the entire Song of Ice and Fire series, the entire universe, including the main series, and reading this book, I absolutely loved finding out more about her, and my love for her is increased tenfold. She sounds like she was absolutely amazing, and I love seeing how she advocated for women. And there were other characters in this book who I really enjoyed learning about and who are now going to be some of my favorite characters in this universe. There were some characters or plot lines that were carried over from The World of Ice and Fire, which I would have liked to have more information about, because I haven't actually read The World of Ice and Fire. I've read like the fandom pages where they talk about the history, so I know some of the things that were in The World of Ice and Fire, even though I haven't read it. But people who have read The World of Ice and Fire say that some of the passages were just directly transferred over, which was a little annoying because they were hoping there would be an expansion on what was in The World of Ice and Fire, and not just parts that were copied and pasted that they'd read before. I know some people had problems with the perspective of this book because since this is a mock history, it is written as if it's a maester of the Citadel telling the story. And so this maester, who is repeating all of this history, does have a bit of a sexist perspective because he is a man in a patriarchal society. So a lot of people had a problem with that because usually in the main A Song of Ice and Fire series, there are characters who are sexist, but there's also female perspectives who are there to counter that and to call them out on their BS, and even male characters who advocate for women in the main series, whereas in this book, it's a sexist male telling the entire story, so you have moments where you see that sexism coming out. However, that didn't really bother me so much because I know that George doesn't want you to think this maester is right. He wants you to be critical of the way that the maester is telling the story, and I also still think there were instances where mainly female characters would call out a patriarchal character on their BS, which I really enjoyed because I always love it when a bad guy gets called out for the things that he's done wrong. I find that very satisfying. However, one of the reasons I didn't give this 5 stars, even though I really liked it and the perspective did not bother me, is I think this is not, I'm not going to spoil anything specifically, but I think George kills off way too many women in childbirth. Yes, I understand that this is a society inspired by medieval times, and back then childbirth was very dangerous. However, there was one chapter where I think 3 major female characters were all killed off in childbirth in that one chapter, and when it happens so constantly and so close together, it starts feeling very repetitive and sort of like a lazy writing choice. I think you can still kill a female character off if you need to for the story's sake, but do it in a different way, make it a little more creative instead of just saying, okay, let's just kill her off in childbirth, because after a while it comes across as very cliche. The other main reason I didn't give this 5 stars is because as I was reading, I would notice times where there were inaccuracies, where George would contradict himself. Like, for example, there was one chapter where it said that a female character's father was named this, and then one chapter later he was referred to by a different first name. There was also another character who was referred to as the great uncle of another character when he was actually her uncle, not her great uncle. And those kind of obvious mistakes were just disappointing to see. I understand that George probably has a hard time keeping track of all these characters in his head, but I feel like his editors should have caught those mistakes very, very easily, and seeing them just makes me wonder how closely the editors actually edited the book, because if they could miss a mistake as blatant as that, it tells me that they really did not proofread this book that closely. The second book that I completed in January was Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This book follows a girl named Kath who is starting college. Kath loves fandom, she loves writing fan fiction, that is really her security blanket, and now that she's in college, she's sort of struggling with if she should continue doing that or if she needs to move on. She's trying to make friends, which is really hard for her due to her anxiety, and her twin sister Ren has become more distant from her, which is hard for Kath because Ren has always been her best friend. Now, this book I gave 4 stars. I really could relate to Kath as someone who is also obsessed with fandom, really shy, someone who has written fan fiction since middle school, and I also loved the love interest in this book. I thought he was absolutely swoon-worthy, a precious cinnamon roll of a man. Like, if he were a real person, I would date him because he is basically the man of my dreams. However, the reason I only gave this book 4 stars is that even though I liked it, I didn't really love it, and once I put it down, it was really hard for me to find the motivation to pick it back up again. I originally was planning to read this book in August 2018, and I read a couple chapters, then got to college, got busy, put the book down, did not pick it up again until November 2018, read a couple chapters, put it down, and then finally in January, I just told myself, you know, you gotta finish Fangirl. You started it twice, put it down, you need to finish it. So I guess that's just because contemporary is not a genre that I usually gravitate towards. I also really wanted to read this book due to its depiction of fandom, which is something that I love. I love fandom culture, I love fan fiction, and I feel like I would have liked to see maybe more of that in the book. I also feel like the ending just was a little so-so for me. I feel like they could have done more with that. Though I do like this book, I enjoyed it. It's not gonna be one of my new favorites like I know it is for some people. So this next book I actually did not give a rating. It was something that I read because it was assigned reading in my medieval Spanish history class. However, I still wanted to include it in the video just because I did read the entire book in January and February, so I still want to include it in my yearly total, even though I'm not giving it a rating. And that is The Song of the Cid. I don't know why the cover is like this. I got this from the college bookstore. I'm renting it, and I don't know why they put two big white stickers on the cover, but they're there for some reason. This is a medieval epic poem, so we actually don't know who the original author was, just because epic poems were usually passed down orally. They were not originally written down, so we don't know who was the original author of this. This translation from Spanish to English is by Burton Raffel, and this specific edition has the Spanish on one side and the English on the other. I obviously only read the English. I know un poquito español, but no muy bueno, so I just read it in English. And the reason I didn't give this a rating is just because, well, one, I only really read it because it was assigned for class. It's not something I would have chosen on my own, and I really had no strong feelings about it either way. I thought it was perfectly fine, but I didn't feel right giving it a rating when it just wasn't something that I was interested in to begin with, and I was only reading it because I had to. I also think I've come to realize that epic poems are just not for me. In high school, I read The Odyssey and I read Beowulf as assigned reading, which are also epic poems, and I didn't really like either of those either. I just don't really like the epic poem format, so I just think that style of literature is never going to be one of my favorites. It's never going to be something that I particularly enjoy. So the next book, which I finished in February, was also assigned reading for school. This was assigned in my Victorians novels class, but it was actually a book that I have really wanted to read for a while. It's a classic, and I really enjoyed it, and that was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I really loved reading Jane Eyre. I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. This book follows a orphan named Jane Eyre throughout her life. It's sort of a Bildungsroman novel, the first Bildungsroman about a female protagonist. And what I really loved about this book is Jane herself as a character, and reading this book, following her through her life, I kind of felt by the end of it like Jane and I were friends almost, like she was my gal pal and we were just sitting around talking. I think probably that's because Jane does directly address the reader in the book, so it made me feel like she was talking directly to me. What I absolutely love about Jane is that she has her morals, and she is not willing to compromise her morals for anyone. She has a good sense of self, she knows what she wants, and she does question how society favors men over women. She questions the patriarchy, which a lot of Victorian readers didn't like, but I, as a modern 21st century female reading this, really liked that, because I can only imagine how radical this must have been for the time, and I'm wondering if there were Victorian women reading this who felt really validated by it, which I think is super important. I did have problems with the romance in this book. I do not think it was the healthiest relationship. I understand this was a very different time. However, the romance did still leave bad taste in my mouth sometimes, so the male romantic interest was not my favorite. However, I will say I did like how this romance was resolved in the end, so I'm okay with how the story ended. There were some very heated debates in my English class about Mr. Rochester. Lots of people really hated him, but in the end, I like how this book ended, and I did knock off half a star just because I was not the biggest fan of the male romantic interest, but in the end, I'm happy with how everything ended up, and I'm happy with how it was resolved, and I really loved this book. I loved reading it. I loved the overall message. I loved Jane as a character, and I think it's going to be one of my new favorite classics. The last book that I completed in January and February 2019, and my first 5-star of the year, the book that I gave to my mother after I finished reading it because I loved it so much and I wanted her to love it so much too, was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book was in my video of 5-star predictions, and I did end up giving it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. This was a book that has been so hyped on BookTube. I don't think I've ever seen anyone say they didn't like this book. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. It was everything I wanted from it and more. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo follows Monique, a journalist who is surprised when she is asked to conduct an interview with Evelyn Hugo, who is a 60s Hollywood film star. Monique doesn't know why she's being asked, and she's an inexperienced reporter, and she's even more surprised when Evelyn says that she doesn't want Monique to write an article. She wants Monique to write Evelyn's biography, which recounts her 7 infamous marriages and answers the question, who was the real love of Evelyn's life? This book does have a prominent bisexual character, and I really liked how that was handled. I should also mention that I would give trigger warnings in this book for domestic abuse and abortion, so if those are things that are upsetting to you and you don't want to read about them, there are smaller plot lines in this book. They're not in the entire book, but they are mentioned in the book. What I really loved about The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo the most was Evelyn Hugo herself as a character, because her voice really resonated with me, and reading this book, I felt like she was a real person. Reading about these movies that she was in and all of her old co-stars in Hollywood, there were times when I wanted to type one of their names into Google to see their Wikipedia page and their filmography, and then I would remember, oh yeah, they're not real. I also really liked how in this book, scattered throughout, there would be newspaper clippings with articles about Evelyn Hugo, which really just made it feel more real to me, so I really liked that detail. My only major problem with this book is that some of the plot developments I found a bit predictable. Some of the twists I predicted very early on in the book. There were some others that I did not predict, so I did find some of it a little predictable. I think part of that is because of things that people on BookTube told me about the book that maybe I wasn't supposed to know going in. And what was ironic is my mom read this book after I did. She's finished it already. And the plot twist that I found predictable, she didn't. And the ones that surprised me, she found predictable, which is a little funny. But despite that, I still gave it 5 stars, because even though I did have a problem with the plot twist a little bit, not really a problem, I just saw them coming, it still felt like a 5-star book to me. I actually cried a couple times at the end of this book. It really just emotionally impacted me. So even though I didn't think it was perfect, I loved it, and it's one of my favorite books that I've read in quite a long time. I can see now why everyone spoke so highly of it. And if you out there haven't read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I would definitely recommend it. I think it is absolutely phenomenal. So guys, that is everything that I read in January and February 2019. I hope you really liked this video. Let me know if you read any of the books that I read these past 2 months and what you thought of them. Please like this video if you enjoyed, and I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, and I hope to see you in the next video.